I'm going to talk about the Rigaku School for Practical Crystallography. How many of you participated in it during the live sessions? Okay, a handful. Well, all right, I'll get to you guys later. How many of you pass this on to your students now? A handful. Okay, a few people. All right, so I'm going to talk about what we did during COVID, and I'm going to start by acknowledging everybody. So those of you that put your hands up before that participated in actually teaching the school, go ahead and stand up for a round of applause, please. Come on. Come on. All right. Jakob?
I'm not getting up because someone's pointing a sniper rifle.
All right. Here we go. All right. So a lot of effort went into producing the school, and what happened was Paul Swepston came to me sometime in April-ish, if I remember, of 2020, after the ACA summer course had been canceled, and there was a summer school in Hungary, if I remember, that year, that had also been canceled, and said, Joe, we got to do something, right? You know, and frankly, we were all sitting at home. Most of us were sitting at home, wondering what to do, doing lots of Zoom meetings and things like that. And so we put this together, and it represents a lot of work from a lot of people. Paul has since retired. Alex Stanley, you probably know, has gone to become CEO of IUCR. Amanda Cochran got married and took another job closer to her home in Ohio. Now, I put everybody in alphabetical order up here except Fraser, and I'll explain that later. We had support from what?
There's no your picture. You missed.
I'm not very photogenic. So Horst here has participated in all the schools. Florian Klimas, also from Olexis, did a quantum crystallography class. Jeff Lingwell from the CCDC covered databases in one of the classes. We've had participation from Robert, Mark, Kristen, who we've talked today, Amelia, who's on our honeymoon, Pierre in the Woodlands, Matthias in the back there. Keisuke did a powder talk early on. Chris Sherman, Akhilesh, Kai, and Jakob all participated. We had some academicians participate as well. Both Richard Staples and Bernard Spengler talked about crystallization. The funny thing was, the first school we didn't talk about crystallization. It was like, yeah, that was a big duh. And then lastly, I really wanted to point out Fraser, who's done a lot of the back end work that makes the school work. So things like getting the forum working, getting the exam working, and many of the things that I'm going to talk about in the subsequent slides all derived from a tremendous amount of work by Fraser. And we actually did this as we did a transactions for the 2021 ACA meeting that was held virtually, and we published this in Structural Dynamics. And I think we're probably getting to the point where we can do another publication in a more, let's say, active journal. So, moving on. What did we do? So, I'm going to talk about what started the school. I'm going to talk about the execution. Then I'll talk about the last school that we did in January of 24. Then I'll talk about the schools in aggregate. And so I'll talk about the basic schools, the 4 basic schools we did, and the 2 advanced schools, and we'll go through some concluding remarks. So we started with the idea that, and I mentioned this, that we needed to fill some voids that were left from all the cancellations during the COVID pandemic. Rigaku has been using Zoom for 15 years now, so we already had quite a bit of experience. We were already using Zoom Webinar, and we decided to use that to deliver the lectures and deal with Q&A. We decided to use the Rigaku forum, which already existed, to disseminate materials, information, advice, Q&A, and things like that. We set up a special email address for the school. This way, no single individual would be bombarded with emails, just mostly Fraser and myself. We decided to have an exam, and this kind of was unique. And at one point, Simon Cole said, yeah, several of my students are going to be taking this and getting credit for their PhD at the University of Southampton. I'm like, oh boy, what have we gotten ourselves into? That was kind of a pucker moment, right? My stomach sank when Simon did that. So we would also provide these certificates of achievement and attendance, and we'll explain that in a little bit. And we would make the school available to anybody who registered. You see that we've touched a lot of different countries over the ensuing 4 years. So we modified our topics. I mentioned, the first course didn't have anything about crystallization. So in 2024, we had the introduction. The theory was quite limited, basically Bragg's law. We added micro-ED. In the second school, we did micro-ED, 3D ED, were novel, and so we considered that an advanced topic. Now it's just part of the general school. As I said, we've added crystallization. Of course, we talked about data collection and strategy, data processing. The first school, we lumped this all into one lecture and found that it just wasn't enough time, so we split it up into multiple lectures. Solution and refinement, absolute structure, reporting and check SIF, and also handling of non-mirror twins. So the theory was very limited. This is basically the limit of the theory. I think you saw this slide yesterday. Basically, you shoot x-rays to the crystal, you do computer magic, and you get a structure. We did not talk about all the wonderful structure solution methods that are out there. Again, we kept the theory at a minimum. We did not talk about least squares refinement beyond throwing a model in and getting a better model out. When we did our first survey, about half the people said there was not enough theory, and enough people said there was too much theory, which told us we were right on the mark. So how do we execute? So we had a lot of Zoom meetings. This time around, we had quite a few less, but we still had to have Zoom meetings. Like before, each team member was assigned a specific task. They went through and also produced questions for the task. This time, we pre-recorded the lecture. That was a little bit painful for some people, but it actually had a very positive result. An example was yesterday. Jessica did a really good job with her pre-recorded lecture. And then we always follow up with a debrief just to make sure if there are any mistakes we made or something that we could do better, we would always improve with each lecture. So how do we use Zoom webinar? At any given time, we had 5 or 6 co-hosts and panelists. This allowed us to perform the introduction, then have somebody monitoring questions, somebody monitoring the chat. This way we could keep things moving, and you'll see why we had to have so much interaction with Zoom. One big advantage of the pre-recorded lecture is it actually allowed the lecturer to participate in the Zoom during the Q&A. So we would often get many questions during the lecture, and you can't stop the lecture, even if it's live, just to answer those questions. We use the Q&A function for upvoting. That was useful because it told us when people had a problem that we needed to look at that more carefully. The disadvantage is that questions would appear and disappear in the Q&A window. We use the chat window to deal with technical issues. It was actually more used to say hello and have a nice day and goodbye and all that. So we use the reporting features in Zoom to track attendance, and this was very important for the certificates of achievement and the certificates of attendance. We also use the Q&A report that Zoom generates at the end of the lecture to answer questions that we never had, that we did not ran out of time or just were too complicated to answer in the main session. And so these actually wound up we get that as an Excel spreadsheet. The questions would go out to people, they would get answered, and then they would be put on the forum. And the last thing, we took students to the forum at the end so they would remember to use that resource to help them move along. So how do we distribute the course materials? I've mentioned the forum. I assume everybody here is a member, maybe not active, but a member anyway. We put the recordings of the lectures there. We had to edit the lectures in the early classes, and we tried to get those on the forum within 24 hours. As we got better, it went more quickly. We also use the forum to monitor download statistics to help complete the attendance records. We put other lecture materials up there. We also put the questions that I mentioned earlier. The course software, Crystallography Pro and OLX2 were available there. And we also put the data sets for students to practice with on the forum. So let's talk about 2024. We had a total of 991 registrations. This was a bit of a surprise. You know, after doing 6 schools prior, we were a little surprised that we would still have so many people. We had most of our attendees were from India, then from the U.S. and the United Kingdom. Admittedly, these were at least in the U.S. hours that were favorable to the U.S. We had a number of African countries participate, and you can see here we've touched quite a few, and about a quarter or 20% of the attendees were from a number of different countries. So attendance by lecture, generally the first few lectures have the highest attendance, and then it falls off if we're doing it live. What is interesting is how constant the online attendees are for this last set of lectures. And that kind of tells us that, you know, the online attendees are kind of staying interested over time. Here we've lost almost half our students over the course of the 10 lectures. So let's see, moving on. When we do the exam, we have 50 multiple choice questions. We have 90 minutes time limit per attempt. That's really pretty generous. We allow 2 attempts if you don't pass. When we did the first school, we started with 96 hours right after the school ended, and apparently a lot of people don't like to do an exam over the weekend. So we gave them 48 hours before we started the timer, and then they would have a full 5 days to complete the exam, or to study and complete the exam. We would give a certificate of achievement for those who got 70% or better. We gave a certificate of attendance to anybody that was eligible for the exam. To be eligible for the exam, you had to participate in at least 50% of the lectures. For the January school, 305 people passed that mark. So 206 exams were taken. We had 137 passes, very typical for the prior schools. We had 33 retakes, pass rate of 80.5%. The average mark was 76.5, and there were a few opt-outs. So, course feedback, generally very positive. Typically, where we do get lowest marks are course pace, because we tend to go pretty fast. I mean, we've only got 10 hours to do a lot of work, but by and large, you know, we're pretty happy with this. I won't read all these off, but generally people are quite happy with the school that we hold. So let's talk about the schools in aggregate. So this is all the schools together, and I'm going to start off by answering the question, what were we thinking? And when we started, we had 1,200 registrants for the first school. So we started with a 500-seat webinar license. Then about a month in, we bumped it up to 1,000. And then when we had over 1,200 registrations, we had to go up to a 3,000-seat license. So this is the first clue that things are going to start to get a little hairy. We had 771 students the first day. It was our first lecture. We had 150 questions come in during that lecture, and we just couldn't answer them fast enough. Things got a little bit better with time. And mind you, this is using the chat for all the technical problems, well, hopefully all the technical problems. So these were really all crystallographic questions. we did not expect to have to deal with a deaf student and a paletypist. So this was somebody that was sitting there translating for the deaf student as we're doing the lecture in real time. Nowadays, we could probably use the subtitle feature in PowerPoint and get past that. But still, that was interesting. Then we had another student who was actually undergoing active chemotherapy. We made some allowances for his ability to finish the exam. As I mentioned earlier, we did not expect students to use the certificate of achievement for their graduate work, and that really upped our game. And then finally, we did not include crystallization in that first school. It was a dumb moment when that came in on the, and I take responsibility for that. So for the 4 schools, we had a total of 4,436 unique registrations. We had 3,090 attendees, and we reached 86 countries. I think that's pretty impressive. For December 20 and June of 21, we held advanced schools. We covered powder and PDF methods, high pressure data collection, how to use Evolve 3D, understand reciprocal space with Evolve 3D, micro-ED. Remember, I said that the early on in the micro-ED realm, we treated this as an advanced topic, no longer. I mentioned Jeff Linguel from the CCDC talked to us about data mining. We covered charge density, non-spherical atom refinement, macromolecular crystallography, small angle X-ray scattering, and advanced topics in twinning. So for those 2 schools, we had 925 registrations, 664 attendees, and we reached 63 countries there. Again, most of the, in this case, most of the students came from the U.S. And other English-speaking countries. Now, I should point out that we also ran schools. We generally started at 8 o'clock. This would give us good coverage with Europe and the U.S. But we also had a set of schools that started at 6 a.m. in the Woodlands, a little bit more friendly here in Europe, but specifically designed to allow more attendance by Asian students. It's hard to get people that normally are sound asleep at 6 a.m. to actually be teaching a class at 6 a.m. So for all 6 schools, we had 5,122 registrations, over 3,500 attendees, and we reached 109 countries. So again, I think that's really quite good considering how many people were disadvantaged by COVID and the shutdown of so many programs during that period. So I wanted to mention where we are today. With a tremendous amount of effort by Fraser, he's developed an online school that if you go and pick up your phones, come on, raise them up, grab the QR code, and this will allow you to use the school. So I think I'm going to try this. Please try this. As Fraser said, consider yourself beta testers, have your students look at it. What will happen is you'll have a menu of videos that you can watch, but then you'll also have the Rigaku school that you can enroll in. Once you've gone through, or once your students have gone through 90% of each of the 10 lectures, a minimum of 90%, so we track. You can't fast forward. Your student could put it in the background and ignore it, but basically they have to have a 90% for each of the lectures. Then they will have the ability to take the exam. If they pass the exam, then they will get a certificate of achievement. Now, the exams are unique. So one of the things that we did was everybody who was a lecturer had to create a number of questions well beyond the 5 for each lecture. And so the exam is completely randomized with 5 questions from each lecture, but a random set. So no 2 students will have the same exam, which reduces the chance of cheating. Anyway, so in summary, what have we done? We've got well over 1,250 person hours into the preparation and execution of the 55 hours of lectures. We've reached over 3,500 students in 109 countries, and we've created this on-demand school for practical crystallography. Thank you.